Good morning, evening, or afternoon, depending upon where you are in the world. And if you're watching live, just want to let you know that you can always ask questions in the feedback form or questions to presenter for chat. If you watch this after, you can always go to our website, learnsecurity.org, and send us an email, and we can get back to you with an answer to your question. We are starting a series on the CompTIA Security Plus exam. And we're going to start off by going through each of the different exam objectives one at a time. So some of our sessions are going to be a little bit longer and some will be a little bit shorter, just depending upon the amount of content in each one of those. We're trying to keep each objective as one webinar. So some of them may run a little bit longer than the normal hour that we do, and some may be a little bit shorter than that. It just depends upon the amount of material that we have to cover in there. So we're starting off with 1.1. My name is Don Hester, work for Mays & Associates as an IT auditor, Security Plus certified since before it existed, I guess. I was one of the beta testers when it first came out, so I've been Security Plus certified for a long period of time. Robert G. Rook will be joining us from Indiana University in future lessons, and we'll be presenting some of the topics, but he's not here on this one. Sorry about that. And Ryan Dudley, just a shout out because he's a student from Las Positas where I have taught online classes, and he put together the slides for us. So I want to thank him for that. So we're going to start off with the Security Plus exam just to kind of give you an idea of the different topics that are going to be covered in the exam. If you're going to take the exam, you want to make sure that you've gone through and you understand each of the objectives. Now, when it says 1.1 threats, attacks, and vulnerabilities, there's actually, underneath of that, there are 6 different objectives. And if you go to the CompTIA's website, you can look up the Security Plus exam, download the guide, and then it will tell you what topics are covered under each objective. As we get to each objective, we will tell you what is in each one of those and then cover each of those items as we go. This diagram just kind of tells you what percentage of the questions on your exam should you expect in each of the different areas. And you see in the first 2, threats, attacks, and vulnerabilities, and technologies and tools, not quite, half the exam, but 40% of the exam, just over 40% of the exam, is just on those 2 topics. The rest of it is kind of evenly distributed amongst the other topics. So you want to spend more time studying in those areas if you're not familiar with them. So objective 1.1 is, given a scenario, analyze indicators of compromise and determine the type of malware. And this is for the new SYO 501 Security Plus exam. And if you get their objectives online and download them, it's coming from version 4.0. So this is the newest stuff that they have on their website. So if you're looking at this in the future, there may be a newer one out, but much of the content's not going to change. So you can still use these videos to help you prepare for the exam. First thing, I have to start off with malware. What is malware? One of the biggest things that people sometimes misunderstand, and they think of computer viruses, and they kind of use that as a generic term for kind of everything that's malicious software. In the security circles, we use the word malware to it's malicious software, kind of like truncated, and it covers all kinds of different types of software that are used for malicious purposes. So you don't want to confuse it with a virus, and part of understanding the exam and part of this objective is making sure that you can make a distinguish. What is a virus versus what is a worm? What's the difference between the two? And you want to be able to note what those differences are on the exam. So that's why we're going to cover all the different topics, or the different types of malicious software that's out there, or malware for short. First one's virus. Everybody, again, this one seems to be ubiquitous. Everybody uses the term for anything bad. So in some instances, you may go to a website, if it's not run by security professionals, and they may say, oh, it's a computer virus. You have to kind of look beyond that, because sometimes you will see an example, a news article, in the New York Times or something like that. They say virus hit city or whatever it is. One of the issues you run into is it may not have been a virus, technically. It was some type of malware. It may have been a specific type of malware. and they're not differentiating those terms. So what is exactly a virus? It's a piece of malicious code, but it's a code that joins another piece of code that's on your computer. So let's say you have an executable code like Word.exe, which is the executable program that runs Microsoft Word. And a virus would have to use that executable and put its bad code inside of it. Think of a virus in real life, you know, a biological virus. It uses the cell that you already have in your system, and then they put a virus inside of it, or the virus gets inside of it, and then corrupts that cell and has that cell now creating more viruses and doing whatever havoc that the virus does in particular. Same thing here. You have to have code for it to get inside of, and that's basically what a virus is. Now, if you had a program that's standalone that does not require, does not get into another piece of code, then it's not a virus. Then it's a worm or some other type of thing, or other type of general malware. So viruses, and the key thing that you need to know for the exam is that it is inside of, it invades some type of other executable. And when that program runs, whatever that program is, then that virus can be activated. So the virus can't be activated if it's not run, right? So that's what a virus is. Next on our list is armored malware. Now, you probably see all kinds of copyright protection type of programs that are out there that are made so that you can't get inside of the program and try to make your own version of it. So there's a lot of types of security that they put into programs so that people can't steal it from them. So this is a good example of armored malware. Is an example of when hackers that design malware try to hide the code inside of it so people can't reverse engineer it. One of the reasons for doing that is to make sure that people will not be able to figure out how their virus or malware works. So they don't want people to reverse engineer it. If you think about it, if you're an antivirus company and you want to figure out how this malware works, you need to reverse engineer it so you can see how it works, so that then you can take your application, your antivirus or anti-malware application, to be able to detect, find, and eradicate the malware. So the hackers want to make sure that people are not able to do that, and so they put protections in place. And a good example, and we call that armored malware. So that's basically what it is. A good example of it is Zeus or Zbot. It's a Trojan that encrypts itself so that other criminals won't steal their intellectual property, so to speak, but also to help thwart antivirus and anti-malware developers from also trying to reverse engineer it. It's not perfect, you know, it's just as good as whatever the level of encryption that they use on it. The next one we have is crypto-malware. And basically this is like a big bucket to cover everything that is malware that does some type of encryption. And there's all different types, and we'll talk about some of the different types like cryptojacking and ransomware. Those are specific examples of crypto-malware. When we say crypto-malware, it's just some type of malware that uses encryption. And not to protect itself like the armored malware, but part of the attack or part of what it's doing is encrypting things. So, for example, if it encrypts all the files on your system, then that's like a ransomware. So it's encrypting all of those different types of things. If it's doing some other type of thing where it's encrypting other types of files, then it can also be considered crypto-malware. So you want to take a look at this. Now, the particular type that you're probably going to hear about 99% of the time is called ransomware. And that is where the malware gets onto your system, it locks all the files on your system, and then it asks for a ransom. It asks you to pay in cryptocurrencies in order for that to unlock and get your information back. Now, we've done on our YouTube channel under Trainers Underground, you can look at a presentation we did a few years ago about ransomware. It's a whole hour just talking about ransomware. at that point in time, we found that 75% of the time when you paid the ransom, you got the ability to decrypt and got your files back. So about 25% of the times that didn't happen. There are specific types of malware that doesn't, ransomware that doesn't, it's actually destructive. It pretends to be ransomware, but it's not. They try to get you to pay, and then they have no intention of letting you have your files back. That's a different type. Now, some people oftentimes ask about ransomware and say, hey, you know, that's kind of a new thing. The trend is not new. Ransomware is not new. It goes all the way back to 1989. They used to have, you know, and they didn't have email and all that kind of stuff back there, or wasn't quite used as readily back then. They actually used a floppy disk to get the ransomware put out, and it was called AIDS. But anyways, this ransomware goes all the way back to 1989. It's not a new phenomenon. What's new about it is the ability for criminals to figure out that it's a lot easier to try and get someone to pay to get their systems back or their money back, rather than it is to try and take information out of a system and then trying to sell that on the dark web. Because not every organization has data that you can sell on the dark web, right? So a lot of organizations, they think, well, we don't have anything that criminals want, so we're not going to get ransomware. The problem is, nobody's going to break into us to try and take all our data out. And that's true, because they may not be able to sell it. But if they ransom it, you're willing to pay to get your information back. And a lot of organizations have said, well, it just depends upon how bad the incident is, if a ransom comes. And again, FBI doesn't want you paying for those, because if you pay for it, it only gets the criminals, you know, worked up, and it proves that crime pays, right? So then they're going to want to keep on doing it. WannaCry is probably one of the largest ransomware ones that's been out there. It's been in the news. Different variations of it have been out there. This is a screenshot of what you might see if you had that malware. Basically, it locks your screen out, and you see that, and then you can't get into your thing. And it tells you how to go and pay for Bitcoins. It tells you how to get Bitcoins and pay for them and all that. And just another example, this is a specific example of ransomware. So remember, for ransomware, it is a malware that basically gets into your system and then locks your files out by encrypting them, and then it tries to access all the files. Some of them are really smart. They try to look for backups as well. And if a backup is connected to the network, they try to also encrypt that so that you have to pay the ransom, right? So a lot of times the way around that is to air gap. We call it air gapping. That means that there's no connection from the backup to the network, because if the ransomware gets on the network, it can find possibly the backups, and if it finds the backups, it can then encrypt them as well. And then you don't really have a way out, right? So you kind of want to watch out for that. Next one is worms. So when we talk about worms, typically these are is a malicious program, but typically what it does is it's on the network. So what do we mean when we say that it's on the network? So in other words, the malware actually tries to go across the network, find systems that have a vulnerability, exploit that vulnerability to copy itself to that system. Now, a worm, now this is a general term for a worm. You could have ransomware that is also a worm, right? So you have these different types of ransomware that kind of fit together. When you're taking the exam, don't just worry about the general terms that we have. And when if the question is asking about something about, this is a program that can run on its own, and it's usually a network-based attack, then you're looking for, the answer is a worm. It's a program that usually exploits something across the network and then copies itself to another computer. And the reason why we call it a worm is because it like worms its way through your network. Back in 2001, there was a high-profile worm called Code Red and Nimda. And then in 2003, there was a SQL Slammer that came out. And in 2005, Zotbot was out there as well. So there's all kinds of, there's Code Red 2. I mean, there's all kinds of other ones that have happened in the past. So worms are something that we do have to worry about. Our anti-malware software tries to find those things. And remember, it's network-based, and that's the key point that you want to take away for the exam. Now, Trojans, if you look at what a Trojan is, if you think about the old story of the Trojan War, what did when the people were attacking the Trojan stronghold, they decided they were going to give them a gift. So they take a big, huge wooden horse, and then they get inside of it, and then they made it so that they could bring it into their city walls. And once it was in their city walls at night, they then got out of the horse and attacked everybody. And then they were behind the walls, and then they could, let their buddies in and all that. So the whole idea of a Trojan is something similar to that. It looks like it's something that it's not, but once it's into your system, then the malware, whatever it is, will execute and do whatever it does. And what it executes could be ransomware again. It just depends upon, so again, these are very general terms. So if you're saying that something is hidden inside of something else, then you should think Trojan. A good example of that is sometimes you get an email and it says it's a birthday card or something like that. You have to play the executable to see the birthday card. Boom, then there you go. As soon as you play it, then inside of that, the malicious software comes out and then does whatever it does to your system. And it could do all kinds of different things to your system. So when we say Trojans, that's what we're thinking of. I think Back Office back in 1999 is a good example of one of those. But think about it, it's brought inside by usually somebody that's an authorized user on the system. They open up the attachment, whatever it is, they think they're opening something that it's not, and then the malicious software is hidden inside. Now, another type of one is a rootkit. And the reason why we call it a rootkit is because it's something that has administrative access to the system. So the malicious software that somebody gets into a system that then gives somebody access, the hacker usually, administrative access to that operating system that's in there. So a good example of what a rootkit would do, and the reason why I call it a rootkit is in a Linux-based, Unix-based, and the newer Apple versions, root is like the administrator account in Microsoft operating systems. Both of those, whether it's administrator or root, are typically the default accounts that have complete control over the operating system. And so when we say root, that's what we're talking about. And when we say rootkit, that means it is a kit that, or a suite of applications that gets put into the operating system that gives somebody remote access to that administrative privileges on that system. So basically, they have full run of the system. Anything root or administrator can do, they would be able to do remotely. And there's different ways that hackers can access that rootkit in order to get onto your systems and access them and do whatever things they want to do. Typically, what it also does is because it has administrative access, it can do things to try and hide itself in the operating system. All kinds of different tricks that it uses in order to do that. I don't know, there's nothing on the exam that I think that you need to know for that. But again, remember, what you need to remember for the exam is that the rootkit is a suite of applications or malicious software that once inside of a system gives them access to basically anything in the OS that they want to have. Now, our next one is a keylogger. You may have heard this. These can be either software or hardware based, and I'll explain a little bit about that here in a second. But it's exactly what it sounds like. It logs your keystrokes. So think about this. You'll go to your bank to make a withdrawal or just even check what your balance is. What do if you're on your computer? You go to www.wellsfargo.com, and then you type what? Username and password. Now imagine if somebody was capturing all your keystrokes, what would they get? They would get a list. They would get www.wellsfargo.com, and then they would get username and password. So guess what they would know? what your username and password is, and they'll even know what website you're going to. So everything that you keylog into your system on your keyboard is going to be captured. Now, there's two different ways of doing this. There's what we call the software or hardware-based. Hardware-based ones are little, typically USB, they look like a USB drive, but with a USB on both sides, one male, one female adapter. And basically what they can do is they can stick it between your keyboard and where your keyboard plugs into your system. You can buy these on Amazon. The little picture to the right, that's an example of a retailer on Amazon that sells those. Now, they sell them for all kinds of what they consider legitimate reasons, like, you know, monitoring employees and all that kind of stuff. They're fairly inexpensive to get. They're even possible to make. There's websites out there that tell you how to make ones yourself. Interesting thing about that is they're hard to detect. And one of the reasons why is the antivirus is typically not going to be able to see what is connected via the USB, especially if it's not exposing itself to the operating system. And if all it's doing is passively recording everything that you type on the keyboard, it's hard to detect. Now, software-based ones are just what you would think of. You have to install those on the system. These are very popular for, if you look online, they're very popular for mobile devices. And that is so that you can know what your children are doing, know what your spouse is doing, monitor your employees. There's all kinds of things that they have under Keylogger's software that they say is legitimate. The problem is a lot of criminals also use these types of programs in order to get them. Now, many of them can be caught by anti-malware. And you think, oh, I'm safe from that because I have anti-malware at work. Well, if your employer is implementing a keylogger, they would probably put a whitelist in the anti-malware software to tell it not to expose the fact or to disable this application, that it's not malware. Problem with doing that is if a hacker knows that that's what you're doing, then that's the kind of code that they're going to try and get onto your system. Try to whitelist their malware in order to run on your system. So anyways, there's a lot of ethical issues related to using it for any of these purposes. And then obviously it's illegal if it's being used to hack into somebody's system. So those are keyloggers. You just need to know for the exam that that's exactly what it is, exactly what it says. It logs the keystrokes that you have. The next one's Adware. Now, Adware, you're probably very familiar with what Adware is. It is software that is on your system that its whole purpose for living is to basically send you ads. So a good example of that is you download a screensaver for your operating system, and inside of that, typically they will put some type of adware that they either monitor what you're doing to send you ads, or the software itself will send pop-ups to you. So if they can get you to download a screensaver, then they have a way of getting past the pop-up blockers that you might have in your web browser. So typically when we say adware, it's just basically unwanted ads. Now these are not, I don't know if I would call them malware, because they're not necessarily malicious, they're annoying. So hackers typically aren't necessarily running these, although some hackers may. They may try to use fake ads to get you to click on something to go to someplace that they then try to, they bait you in order to try and get you to download some other malicious software. So back in the old days, it used to be an example of adware was it would go crazy, and then you'd have pop-ups all over your screen and you couldn't see anything anymore. That's a good example of adware. Bad example, because for the legitimate users, the users trying to use adware for marketing revenue, if you had filled somebody's screen up with advertisements, what are they going to do? They're going to delete all that stuff. And it kind of reminds me of that movie that was just on, and they were talking about, how much of the screen space can they fill up with ads before, people start to reject it. And I thought that was kind of funny. What was that name of that movie? That's the one where, oh man, I shouldn't bring up examples if I can't remember the name of the movie, but the movie was Ready Player One. That's what it is. The guy was talking about, you know, if we can fill it like 80% of their screen with ads, and they'll be fine. I don't think that's true. Anyway, so that's what adware is. Now, spyware is similar to that, but basically what it does is it typically installs without your knowledge, or it's hidden in something else you installed, like, again, another screensaver software or anything like that. And it can be specifically designed to steal information. Basically, maybe it is a keystroke logger, but it's in there to try and get information from you. Basically, what it tries to do is spy on you. Now, one way that and again, there's a legitimate use for this in some instances, but not necessarily. Sometimes, basically, the software we call spyware because it spies on you, but organizations will use that in order to figure out how to send you targeted ads, or to track what you do and what you like on the internet and what you access on the internet, so that they know what you like, and because they know what you like, they can send you ads related to that. If anyone's listened to my webinars on YouTube or on Bright Talk, you know that I typically don't use Google search engines. I typically use Bing, but one of the reasons for that is because I don't use it very often. And if you go into Google and you search for something, I had a friend of mine, they were saying, hey, you know, I'm looking for a wedding cake, and I was on my machine. I'm like, oh, I'll just use Google this time. Don't know why I said that. Typed up wedding cake or baker or something like that, and all of a sudden, from then on, almost every ad that I found or saw on websites and all that stuff was all related to wedding stuff, wedding photographers, wedding locations, honeymoon getaways, all of this stuff, because I had searched for something. Now, some people may call that spyware, and that's not exactly spyware, but spyware works kind of along those lines. That's just the way that they make money in order for them to have a free search engine for you. I mean, none of us want to pay for doing searches on the internet, so we're granting them the ability to do, use our information, our demographics, what we search for, in order to send us ads, and that's how they make their revenue. Spyware is a little bit different because typically it's installed on your machine, and then it typically tracks everything you do. Now, we can have spyware. This is a big bucket of different types of malware as well. We have malware that we generally call spyware that basically does everything like listen to your conversations. So you can install this on somebody's cell phone. You can listen to conversations. Even when they're not in a phone call, you can listen to conversations on it. And again, yes, organizations try to put that in under what they consider legitimate instances in order to track and know what you're talking about. So again, they can send you ads. So there's two different uses of it. There's three different players, I guess. You have the big corporations that put that in their software so that they can spy on you to basically send you ads or to figure out what you like so they know what to send ads to. You have hackers that try to get that installed on you, on your machines, so that they can spy on you, try to catch your social security number so they can sell it on dark web, whatever they're going to do with it. And then you have that other group of people such as parents or your organization that want to know what your employees are doing or what your spouse is doing or what your children are doing. Again, that's another type of use of spyware. So we have three different use cases for three different groups of folks, I guess, for lack of a better term, using that type of malware. And some people will consider some of it legitimate and not really malware, and a lot of other people will just consider it malware. And then we have bots is the next type of thing that we have. And basically, you might have heard of a bot, and we're not talking necessarily about, your vacuum cleaner that's a bot, but we're talking about basically it's a piece of software that performs a task, but it's under control of another program. So it listens typically on the internet to a chat channel or something on the internet, and then it will execute whatever commands it sent. So there's a command and control structure that is set up for it. Typically what happens is hackers will hack into a device, they'll put their code on it, and then these bots, basically, sometimes we call them zombies, will basically go out and do whatever commands they've been asked to do. So a good example of a type of bot that's been set up out there has been asked to go out and mine for cryptocurrencies. Sometimes they're asked to go out, or they're commanded to go out and attack websites in what we call a denial of service attack. And so they can do a wide range of things. So they can do all kinds of stuff. They can set up different attacks to attack other systems, to get more systems compromised, to make more bots. They can be made to do all kinds of things. You will actually find on the dark web where you can rent a bot network, and when you rent that bot network, you can tell that bot network to do whatever it is that you want to do. So there's a lot of different examples of it out there, but the idea is that it's a compromised machine that then is being told by another computer what to do. And so two different types of things we have as far as terms are, bots and zombies are synonymous. So if you see the term zombie, we're talking about a bot. If you see bot, we're talking about a zombie. And think about zombies in the old movies. They're just mindless, and they walk around, they do whatever, well, they don't really do whatever they're told. They just look for people to eat, I guess. But botnets, they're dumb, and they just do whatever they're told to do. And that's basically what it is. They're infected with some type of malware that listens to commands and then executes whatever those commands do. Now, when you have a group of those put together, we call that a botnet. And there's a command and control structure in botnets that you need to understand. And I have this little graphic here just to kind of help illustrate. It's not necessarily perfect or anything like that, but once you have an infected machine, and by the way, the infected machines for botnets and zombies can be anything. Like that vacuum cleaner you saw on that previous slide, or your appliances, your cell phone, your switches, routers, your game console, your car, your security cameras, laptops, desktops, servers. All of that stuff can be infected with the software, and they can be joined into what we call a botnet. Now, on the internet, typically hidden or not easy to find, will be command and control servers that will, all of those infected devices or machines will then be listening on the internet for commands. And then when the command gets out, maybe it's on our chat channel or something like that, once it sees the appropriate commands and the appropriate, from the appropriate user account or whatever it is, however they identify who they are, and so that not everybody can just run the commands on it. The cyber criminal will then put up his commands, and then all of those devices will execute those commands. And so we've seen in the past, and you can see in the news as well recently, where botnets, here's a good example of one. So on Instagram, and I've seen some marketing on Instagram where it says, hey, you can get 1,000 likes, and you just pay us $10 or whatever it is. Well, a lot of that is being done by botnets. So it's not real people liking what you're paying for advertising. You think you're getting a bunch of likes, but it's actually a botnet of IoT devices, Internet of Things devices, that have been hacked into, and those devices will log in as a Instagram account. So hackers will set up Instagram accounts. They will get into those devices, have those devices log in as that user, and then have them go in and like things. And all that's done through a botnet. And so they said, hey, and a big one is cameras. Security cameras seem to always be in the botnet hacked devices. So they're running all kinds of fake profiles as well. So that's one example of what you could do with a botnet. You can do a distributed denial of service attack. That's another example of what you can do with a botnet. But remember what we're talking about when we talk about bots. We're talking about machines that have been compromised, and they are now being command and controlled. And when there's a whole bunch of them, we call it a bot. And they can do all kinds of things. And criminals are just going to become more ingenious in the future and come up with new and different types of ways of doing things. Next one, different type of remote access Trojan. It's basically a toolkit that gives you the ability to either spy on people or log into the system remotely and then possibly access command line tools in order to do same type of things like rootkits. In this one, though, it allows someone to have allows somebody to have remote access, not necessarily root access, right? So the difference between the two for the exam, what you need to remember is a remote access Trojan is something that allows you to remotely access another device, and then a rootkit is something that allows you, once on it, to then run administrative commands on that device. You may have a piece of malware or a group of malware that is both of these things, a rootkit and a remote access Trojan. So just remember that a lot of these we're dealing with terminology and we're talking about big buckets of information. And when we're taking the exam, you just need to remember that remote access Trojan, or a RAT, is something that does remote access. And yes, a lot of these overlap. Don't get concerned about the overlap. Just focus in on what these things mean. And when you're on the exam, if it looks like it says somebody uses this tool to remotely access and control another computer, and they may have in the answers a remote access Trojan, and they may have a rootkit. And so a lot of people will say, oh, rootkit, because they're doing remote actions. It didn't say that they were running as root or administrator in the question that they asked. They said they were remotely accessing, and that should have been a clue when you're looking at the exam that they're looking for a remote access Trojan. So you just need to keep those things clear when you go forward, because again, a lot of this malware kind of overlaps with each other. Sometimes malware is a Trojan, and the next one, a logic bomb, right? So, so you have to remember, okay, what is the question asking about, and then what is the best answer for that? And they always do that on exams. So you always got to make sure that you're looking for the best and most precise answer. Because yes, technically, you can say, well, you got a piece of malware that is going to, once a certain condition is met, will then execute. That's a logic bomb, right? And it may say that, and it may add on to it that does something else, and then that may try to confuse you, and then you think, oh, well, that's an example of a rootkit or a remote access tool. But remember, when they're saying a predefined condition makes the execution happen, that's a logic bomb. So basically what a logic bomb is malware that will execute when whatever happens. Certain time happens, you click a certain thing, a certain number of things happen, whatever it is on your computer, you hit a certain threshold, or any type of thing. So anything that you can count on a computer, you can, or anything you can do on a computer, you can say, hey, that could be a condition, and once that condition is met, do this. So that's a logic bomb. A good example of that, Sony BMG had embedded what we call a logic bomb in their music CDs, which basically then installed software into their customers' computers to prevent them from ripping those and trying to turn them into MP3s, because people were sharing them on the internet. Now, some people say, well, that's like a rootkit or it's like a Trojan, but remember, it's once you put the disk in, that was the predefined condition, it became the logic bomb. And yes, it opened up remote access and a rootkit to those computers. So it was a logic bomb, it was a rootkit, and it was a Trojan. So when they're asking the question, you just need to know exactly what they're talking about. What is the question asking about? Is it asking about what we talked about? It executes once something happens, and that's a logic bomb. If it's something that gave something access remotely, then it's a remote access Trojan. If it's something that grants administrative access to the system, then it's going to be a rootkit. And it could be all three, too. But remember, when you're looking at the questions, figure out what they're asking for and then do what is considered the best answer. Another example of a logic bomb, sometimes we call them a time bomb. I think back in the 80s there was a time bomb, and it's like on somebody's birthday, like Beethoven's birthday or something like that, it launched itself. That was the condition. When this date happened, do this execution, whatever the malicious code was. We don't we typically just call those logic bombs. Some people call them time bombs. Oftentimes we talk about time bombs, we're just talking about software, trialed software, so it's not always a bad thing. So you get trial software, it works for 90 days, and then it turns itself off. That's another example of a time bomb. There's a date happens, and then the code does something because of that date. So a time bomb, whether it's a birthday, sometimes we call it a birthday attack, when it hit like a birthday of Beethoven or whatever, then it would launch the whatever malicious software it had. So that's an example of a time bomb. Just think of a time bomb on a bomb, right? When it runs out, the time runs out, or the time hits, then whatever malicious stuff is going to happen, happens. Backdoors. So when we talk about backdoors, oftentimes when developers make an application, in order to make their job easier, sometimes they just do it on accident. They try to leave what we call a backdoor, and think of your house, a back entrance way, so they can get access to the application. And sometimes it's not put in there on purpose. Sometimes it was just unknown and it's there. But basically what happens is it allows the developers to circumvent the authentication and the controls like that users have to log into something. So it's a backdoor. It allows them to get past it. So it allows somebody like a hacker to gain unauthorized access to the system without having to figure out what the username and password is, because they just use the backdoor where it doesn't ask for a username and password. So think about that. You go to like a military base, and you come to a military base and they have a gate there and a guard there, and you have to show them your ID, and they got to make sure that you have access to it. Now imagine if you go down the street like 3 blocks and the gate's open and nobody's there. That would be an example of a backdoor. Same thing in an application. Nobody's going to ask you a question. You just go right across it. So that's a good example of a backdoor. Now, another type of malware that we have, which is a very difficult type of malware to get a hold of, and we call them polymorphic. And basically, what you need to know about polymorphic is that it changes. The malware morphs into whatever it needs to be in order to either evade detection or to come up and get into another system. A good example of it, and I think there's been examples where malware creators that are doing it for research purposes have been able to create a malware that basically, it's like a worm, and basically, it's like a zombie. It's like both. And basically what it does is it scans the system to determine what type of system it is, determines whether it's a Windows, Linux, or Apple, or Android, or whatever the operating system is, and then can download cargo or an attack from a command and control network to then send a specific type of an attack to that system that it found, and then change itself to change. Basically, it's like it has a whole toolkit. Like, how am I going to change myself in order to break into that other system? And then once I'm into that other system, now I can launch attacks from that system. But when we say polymorphic, it's not like a hacker breaking into it. It's the malware itself gets into a system and then changes itself either to evade detection or to figure out new ways to compromise other systems. So, and it can also be just multiple types of software or malware all rolled up into one. So we say polymorphic, poly meaning multi, just think of it, multiple different types of malware. This is where it's, that English class where you had to remember, look up dictionary terms and all that stuff. Poly means multiple, morphic means change. Multiple change malware. There you go. So that's what you need to know for that. Now this one's not on the exam, but it's kind of something that's starting to come out on the internet, and basically what it is a type of ransomware that's not encrypting your system necessarily. Sometimes it's real software on your system, other times it's just a complete hoax, right? But what Doxware is a partially ransomware, partially what we call doxing, which is basically you take personal information about somebody, you post it online to usually cause them embarrassment or something like that. So think about this. you get an email. I've received one of these, and this was a hoax. I didn't have any of the ransomware or any of the malware on my machine, but I got an email saying, hey, you know, we know what websites you're looking at. We have a picture of you and a picture of what you were looking on the internet, and we're going to post that on your Facebook account because we've got your username on that, unless you pay us 5 Bitcoins or whatever it is, or 1 Bitcoin. And that happened to this guy down here in Australia. I think that's what this article is, or this picture is. Webcam hackers caught this guy doing something he shouldn't have been doing and wanted $10,000 in ransom. Otherwise, they're going to post it on his account. He, of course, did not pay up, which is probably a good thing, and they never posted it. Again, for most of these attacks, they're either hoaxes, or even if they had the video, they're not going to get any money from you by posting it, so why post it? So it's all just the threat of the attack that gets people to pay the ransom. But now there's other ones where it's actually software that goes into your system that's like spyware, grabs the information that you have, does screen scrapes of seeing what you're looking at online or what you're typing on your keyboard. So maybe spyware and Keylogger and all that stuff wrapped up into one, and then it may send you a ransom demand saying, hey, we've captured all this. Now, typically, if you have some type of malware like this on your system, they will send you the pictures that they have and let you know. So there's a difference whether or not, if they just say, hey, I got pictures of you doing whatever it is that you're doing, and they don't provide them to you, it's probably a hoax. If they send them and it is you in the picture, well, then there's probably ransomware or Doxware on your machine of some kind. So good reason to make sure that you keep your malware up to date, anti-malware software up to date. Another example of one that was not exactly on the exam, maybe it's under Crypto-malware, but it's not specifically called out, and that's called Cryptojacking. And basically what these is malicious code that they put onto a system, and it basically mines for coins. Sometimes this is a botnet where they take cameras or whatever it is that they've, IoT devices that they've taken over control of, and then they make all of those systems mine for crypto coins, so they're trying to make money. So this type of malware is less harmful to you per se, in that all it's doing is stealing CPU utilization. They just take whatever your processing power is and they steal that, and they use that to try and create money or currency from crypto coin miners. So it's not hurting your system other than it's reducing its performance. So it's not like taking data out of your systems. It's not trying to use spyware on you or anything like that. They're just using it to mine for Bitcoins. So if you look at the 3 different models that you have as being a hacker, if you're going to break into something, you can break into somebody's network, try and take the information out, and then try to sell that information on the dark web. There's a lot of work into that. You got to break into the system. Once into the system, you got to find information. Then you got to take the information out, not get caught. Then you have to take that information and then try to sell that on the dark web. It's a lot of work, right? Now, you can do an easier method, right? You can go into a system once you break into a system, and you can lock that system out, and then people will pay you in order to get their systems back. Well, how about this is another business model that the hackers may have, and that is, hey, let's just break into the system and then hide there so that nobody knows that we're there, and we'll just use their CPU to mine for Bitcoin. So we'll make money that way. In all 3 different scenarios, there's different ways of making money. The one that takes the least amount of effort is cryptojacking. One of the reasons why it was going up last year is because cryptocurrency was at all-time highs. Now that it's kind of slowed down and it's kind of gone down, we've seen cryptojacking kind of slow down as an attack vector because it doesn't pay as much as it used to. And if people are still paying ransom for ransomware, then you're going to see more criminals go into that direction. Now there is specifically malware that is out there that is kind of, we may call it polymorphic, in that it's ransomware and cryptojacking all rolled up into one. So in other words, they break into your system, they lock your system out, and then ask you to pay a ransom, and while you're waiting to figure out whether you're going to pay the ransom or not, they're also running Bitcoin or some type of cryptocurrency miners on that system, because the system's not doing anything else, can't do anything else because everything's locked out. So they just put it to use. So they're going to make money off of your CPU while you're locked out, and you clean it off and get rid of it and then reinstall your operating systems and all that stuff. But here's the thing, however they got in the first place, they're going to try and get back in that same way. So unless you figured out how they got into your system to put cryptojacking software on it or whatever malware, you're still going to be a target. They like return customers, you know. So now another type of jacking that we talk about is formjacking. It's a little bit different. It's kind of like a little bit like screen scraping, we sometimes say, and that is basically taking a screenshot of whatever's been put on the screen. And formjacking kind of does the same thing in that it's JavaScript code that they put into a web page, not on your particular information, and then it tries to take any information you put into that web page. So where would you most likely see this formjacking appear? And that would be on e-commerce websites, where you're going to type in your name, your address, your phone number, your credit card numbers, security code, your zip code, you know, for the billing address and all that stuff, all the stuff that they want for stealing credit card information, they're going to grab if you're on a website trying to pay for something. So formjacking is a type of malicious code that is placed on websites to try and get information when someone fills out a form. This is different than like screen scraping, because this is on the website of things. Screen scraping is more on the side of your machine. Whatever's on your screen that you see, it tries to capture, either by taking screenshots or some other type of thing. Formjacking, like cryptojacking and Doxware, are not in the official exam guide. Cryptojacking sort of is. They call it Crypto-malware or something like that. But Crypto-malware is more than just cryptojacking. Now, we've covered kind of all the different types of malware that you need to have for the exam, and as time goes on, there's going to be new types of malware that is going to show up or become more popular. CompTIA will change the exam to include those types of malware in there. I've included 3 of the different types of ones that I've seen out there in the world. They're popular right now. So I just added those to this to kind of future-proof it a little bit in case those things come up. And we may have to redo this one if they come up with a whole different exam guide or different exam objectives in the future. One other thing, you can kind of look at different reports that are out there. Symantec does a security report. I think they do it like on an annual basis, and they basically tell you what they're seeing. They get all their intelligence from what their anti-malware software captures. And if you look at the trends in 2019, or actually it's 2019 report, so the trends are actually in 2018. But cryptojacking went down. Like I said earlier, cryptojacking was kind of popular, but because Bitcoin values and cryptocurrency values kind of went down, they stopped using that. Mobile ransomware, though, went up. So for mobile devices, people attacking your phones, lock your phone or your tablet out, or your IoT device of some sort, lock that out to make you pay ransoms. I've seen ransomware on TVs, smart TVs. They get hacked, and then pretty much it bricks it at that point in time, because I don't know that there's a good way to get into your TV to put in the code to take out the encryption that they put onto the operating system that runs your TV. And I don't know what types of security most of those types of devices put into them. As a consumer, you largely don't know what Samsung puts into their TVs, or what one of the other companies, LG, puts into their TVs to protect their TVs from that type of that type of attack. But that type of ransomware is kind of increasing. And the reason why I say it for things like TVs and refrigerators and other types like that, a lot of those use the same operating systems that our mobile devices use. And so when they go up, if there is a refrigerator that is running an unpatched version of Android on your network at home, it may get locked out, and then whatever function that did for the refrigerator may no longer work. So now enterprise, that means attacking businesses, ransomware was only up 12% last year. So it's still up, and they're still attacking and using that, but it's, so businesses can, you should never rest and say, oh, no big deal. You should always still be concerned about it, but it's not growing at the same pace that mobile attacks are happening. So there's all kinds of other organizations that do these type of reports. Verizon does one. Hopefully we'll put them in other presentations in the future, just to kind of not pick on one company and promote them or anything like that. A lot of different industry organizations will do reports like this. One of the things that you have to take into consideration if you're using this to make decisions on purchasing, you know, what type of anti-malware should I get? You know, I want to make sure that we do something about mobile ransomware. So what software do I need to make sure that doesn't happen to my employees? You have to look at all the different types of software or reports that are out there, because largely this one by Symantec is based on information they have, whereas Verizon, when they do data breaches, they make their own reports, and they may have different numbers. And the reason why they have different numbers is they have different insights. They're getting most of their insight from their security services that Symantec, you know, Symantec has a lot of different cybersecurity services. So if one of those business units that they have got information on it, they're going to report in this generalized information. Verizon may deal with other breaches, and Symantec may not be a part of any of those, and therefore you will end up with completely different numbers. So you have to take everything like this with a grain of salt. You have to consider like kind of generalized information. So one of our goals here is to help make the world a cyber safe place, and so by doing that, teaching folks about cybersecurity and Security Plus for those people that want to get certified on CompTIA. So just a reminder that this webinar is useful for continuing education under self-reporting. I know that BrightTalk can show you that you've watched what webinars you've watched, and so you can use that as proof that you've attended and paid attention for the whole time or whatever, depending upon who you're reporting your continuing education to. Also want to let you know, Mason Associates has a number of cybersecurity services, and that's how we keep the doors on, and the lights on, so to speak. That's it for an advertisement for us. We do these things, so if you go to Mays Associates/cybersecurity, you can find out more, or send us an email. Remember to follow our blog, our BrightTalk channel, if you'd like to see future sessions. If you have any questions on any of the content that we've done or suggestions for future episodes, go to learnsecurity.org, go to contact and fill out the form there. And please remember to rate our session here. That helps it get the word out. And if you follow us, then you will see the next episodes of Security Plus coming out. Next one we have coming out is next week. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much.